All right, so here we are. I was watching the Star Wars trailer, and the Lucasfilm logo popped up, and it had all these nice little bling, hits on the edges here, and it had this nice little metal look here. I've always loved this kind of simple logo reveal, and I figured let's see if we can figure this out in Cinema 4D. So that's what we're going to approach today. We're going to look at moving some lights around. We're going to look at getting these cool bevels going on, bending some type, and just kind of generally getting this kind of style inside of Cinema 4D. I think pretty quickly. So let's go ahead, jump in. Of course, the first thing we need is a MoText object. And with MoText, I'm going to use, first of all, I'm going to center it so it's just centered in the screen here. And I'm also, by default, I have this square frame here, so I'm just going to go change that to 16 by 9 so we're more movie-like there. And I'm going to type our word in. So in this one, I'm going to do Gorilla Films. That sounds legit. Gotta get the URL for that one. All right, so we have our text, and in this case, I'm going to use a font I use all the time. It's this typeface called Knockout. And Knockout starts with a K, there it is, and it gives us these nice tall letters, and I think this will help us kind of bend it and give us this really nice logo, but it's a little bit small. So what we're going to do is combine two sets of bevels to get that beveled, kind of notched out beveled look. So let's look at the reference again, and you can see there's kind of an inside letter, and then there's like an outside beveled piece that's just around the outside. Now, I don't know of a way to do that with just one piece of type, so I'm actually going to use two pieces. What I'm going to do for the first one is I'm going to add some caps. So let's turn on fillet cap. Obviously, we don't want that much, so let's go down to something like 1 maybe. Let's see what that looks like. That looks more like it. It's just like a basic little bevel there. That'll be our inside bevel, and of course, there's only one step, so let's add some more steps. In this case, I'm going to go 5 steps. That sounds good. And now what I want is another set of bevel that's just outside of that. So what do? Well, what we can do is duplicate our MoText and then have this second MoText be only caps. So in this case, I want to say, I'm sorry, not caps, only the fillet, only the edges, only the bevel, basically. So now this will be our second bevel. Okay, first thing we need to do is change the type of bevel. In this case, we're going to use half circle. This is going to give us this nice little edge. But when we turn the other text on, it's just kind of duplicating the other bevel. So how do we fix that? Well, what we do is we come down here and we say constrain. Now, without the other bevel, watch what constrain does. Constrain takes this and turns it into this. And what this does is it keeps the typeface in proportion to what it was. In other words, the bevel ends where the typeface began originally. So it kind of squishes in. And this means when we turn on our second bevel, we have the look we're looking for already, right? So we have our inside bevel and our outside bevel, and they all come together to give us this nice double bevel. So let's hit render, see what that looks like. And what we can do now is bend this. So we got this nice arced bend. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put these both in a null. So let's grab the text here and put it in a null. And I'm going to grab our bend. Nope, we're going to use bulge. That's what it is. Now, what we could do is actually set this up really nice. We could put it inside, or I should say, make it a child of one of your text pieces. And then there's this nice button called Fit to Parent. Boom. That automatically makes your bulge the same size as the type. So now what's cool is I could just shrink it in. But holy, that's not the way I want to shrink it. I want to shrink it this way. So let's rotate it around. Let's hit that button again, Fit to Parent. Now we're talking. Let's turn off the other one. That's what we want. The only difference is we want it on the bottom only. So you just move it up. And now it's not going to, if you center this exactly at the top of your text here, it's not going to affect the top line. It's only going to do the bottom. Okay, so that may be a little bit too much here. Let's kind of pull this down here. And let's also turn on our other outside bevel and understand that if we just put it inside with the null, that our bulge will actually affect everything inside this null, right? So let's look at our reference. And the reference actually has this nice line just below the logo, which I really like. So we're going to make that with a cube. We're going to squish it down, and we're going to stretch it out. And let's go grab the cube and actually squish it this way as well. In fact, I want to turn on our other cameras to look at the scene kind of from different camera angles here. And I want this to be the same size, or at least the same depth and the same position as our logo there. And that way the lights will catch it the same. It'll be the same thickness, right? So now let's put that inside of our bend. But why isn't it bending the way our text bent? Well, a cube by default is going to have one segment per side, which means there's just not enough geometry to bend. And in this case, we want geometry on the x-axis. That's our left to right axis here. We turn this up, you can see, boom, it's moving up. Now we just got to move it down. Okay, so we're part of the way there with this cube. Other things we're missing are the bevels. I'm going to turn up our roundness, just add a little bit more geometry to help this out. I'm going to add a little bit on the sides too. We don't need a lot. But what I'm going to do is add a fillet on the actual cube. And what this is going to do is make that piece a little bit beveled. And again, it's a similar bevel to this, and it's just going to catch the light nicer, right? When we start adding some lights and speculars and all that stuff, it's going to be catching it the same. Okay, one more piece of text we need here. This one we don't want bent. So I'm going to grab our regular text, duplicate it, and this one will be the kind of middle text. In their case, they have Lucasfilm Limited. They got this nice little typeface there. In our case, we could make it say whatever we want. We could say incorporated, right? Well, more of a business. I mean, I guess you can't be more of a business than Disney, but here we go. Incorporated. Boom. Maybe we'll change the font to make it a little bit wider. It's competing a little bit too much, so maybe this is a little bit smaller. So we're just kind of designing our final frame before we mess with any lighting. We want this to look good, designed, whatever. And I dig it. I dig it. Maybe we bend it a little bit less. And there we go. Okay, so now when we hit render, we get none of the fun lighting stuff. What do we do to get this going? Well, I think the fastest way to get this, and the fastest way to get all this nice little shiny little gleams and glints and all this metal look, is to just go straight up specular channel. Now, it's not every day I say that. Specular channel to me is a giant cheat. It's a giant cheat, and sometimes I like cheats, sometimes I don't like cheats. If you can afford the render time, if you can do a real reflection rather than a specular on almost everything else, I always recommend real reflections. However, this look in particular is basically black and white. There's no essentially kind of no reflections going on. It doesn't look like it's in a studio necessarily. And look at all the movement. Okay, this is something I want you to notice. Look at all the little movement going around there. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, are we going to put like 8 softboxes in here and move them all around? We could, but I think we're going to have more control and it'll render faster, and that's the key, if we stick with specular. So let me show you. Let's add a light, and let's create a new material and add it to our cube, add it to our text, and add it to our mode text. Now, to copy those, I just held down Command, and if you hold down Command, you can just drag it. Boom. I'm gonna do it as well up here. Don't need both. Now all of them have the same material, ready to go. Okay, so in our material, I'm gonna turn off our color altogether. I'm gonna go into our reflectance channel. Default specular is on by default. That's why they call it default specular. It's already here, and it'll give us a specular channel to start working with. Now, again, specular channel, if you're not familiar, is a fake. We can move this light over. And let me just show you what this looks like. I'm going to go interactive render region here. And look at what happens. We have a nice little kind of reflection, a nice little gleam going on over on our type. That's caused by the specular channel. And the specular channel is a nice little bump. And we should get a little bit into specular channel, but not a crazy amount. But just understand that this is the kind of a fake reflection curve. What we're trying to say is make it look reflective, but don't base it really on the surrounding. Just base it on where this light is and what's the fall off. So if I want it really sharp, I make a little needle real sharp. Look at how different my specular is than when it's open. Okay, so specular can give you a lot of control if you want a very specific look, like we do in this case. In our case, we're trying to recreate these little gleams and glints and moves, all this stuff. So let's move our light back. Let's only catch the edge, right? So let's keep moving. And let's turn it up. I mean, we can turn up our light, is what I'm saying. There we go. Let's move it up. I'm going to go 200. Look at that. Bling all the way across. Okay, so I'm going to turn up our resolution here because it renders very quickly here. I'm also going to turn on our shadows just so it's not light everywhere. It's not going to kind of light the whole thing. But watch what's happening. As I move up and down, the light pattern across here is going to change, okay? And then you can even see it in the preview, which is really cool. We could actually kind of see what this is going to look like in our preview as we move it across. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to animate a bunch of these lights across our type, and we're going to get these nice little gleams going on. Okay, so let's angle this properly. First of all, I think if it's more on the top edge, it's going to catch more of these edges. And then let's run it across, find kind of a cool space for it. Okay, let's move it down. And in this case, maybe we just need a little bit more bevel. I'm actually going to go to our text and go to our caps and say, I want 2 and 2. I'm just going to double both. And that's just going to give us more surface to bevel on. And then our light, we have our shadow, we have it going on. So let's kind of find some nice places for this light. Let's go back to full screen. I'm going to duplicate the light. I'm going to move one of them over here. I'm going to move it up. That's okay. It's kind of catching too much. Now, what if it's catching too much like this? Well, we could add fall off. We could do all that stuff, but I think it's more about positioning these lights properly. So I'm going to grab them both. I'm going to try to move them back in or forward, actually. So let's open up our other stuff here. Let's move it forward. And that's actually catching better on that edge. That's good. And again, we can also play with this. So what if you like the fall off, but it's too sharp? Well, then you could say inner width, and now we're opening up the whole light pattern. So you can play with specular channel, maybe learn a little bit more about what these are, but mostly understand if it's wider, it's going to be more gleam, wider, brighter. And if it's narrow, it's going to start to get sharper and sharper and sharper. So I kind of want it sharp because that's the look I'm going for. Okay, so these are going to be our edges. The edges are going to be nice, all right? Let's just assume our edges are going to be sweet. We got our little gleams going on here. But what about the front? How do we get those looking good? Well, what we could do is grab another light, and this light is going to catch the front. So I'm just going to move this kind of like over by the G, and then I'm going to grab the Z here and just kind of pull it out. And I'm trying to capture more of the front. In this case, I don't want specular. I actually want real color channel for this, right? Because I don't want to separate my channels and do all this stuff. I'm just going to use our color channel to get some general color going on. Way too bright. I'm going to make it really, really dark. And here's the other thing I'm going to do. I'm going to tell our other lights, our spec lights, to not contribute to the diffuse channel. And these are some, I don't want to call them old school 3D tricks, but this is, if you're not making things realistically, there's a lot of new renders and all this stuff happening where if you just make it like it is in the real world, it'll look like it is in the real world. And that is great. Like all this stuff all these new renders and all these new pipelines and textures and all this stuff and reflectance even in Cinema 4D allow us to do this. For this shot, it's not based on reality. This isn't based on a real thing. So we have to use maybe some of these cheats and some of these things that don't seem like natural language to pull this off. So just keep that in mind. Turning diffuse off these lights allows us to keep the diffuse on this one and then be able to control the brightness of this. So in fact, I could turn off specular and I could say, I only want you to cover the diffuse color of our whole object with this one light. So what does that mean? In this one, that means we have to turn on fall off. So I'm going to turn on inverse square fall off, and I'm going to turn our radius down so it's only affecting a part of the logo. Now, obviously, that's too bright, so we got to tone it way back. But now check it out, right? That was looking pretty ugly until just now. Now we got some nice readable text here, and we can start to bling out parts of this logo. Maybe the edges, right? Maybe the upper part as well. Okay, maybe this one's a little bit less bright. But this is going to allow us to really read that logo in a much more, well, this is redundant, read it in a readable way. Okay, so now we have two sets of lights. We have our diffuse lights, and then we have our specular lights. Okay, so now what we want to do is animate our specular lights so they're moving all the way around this logo, giving us those nice kind of movements, and then we're going to render this out, add a little glow in After Effects, and we'll be all set. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to keep our diffuse lights there, and I'm actually going to just delete the other two lights. I want to animate one of these lights first, and then what I want to do is duplicate that light over and over again and move it around the scene and have a bunch of lights animating. So instead of setting up all my lights and then animating all my lights, I'm going to think a little bit backwards, and I'm going to say this is our spec light here, and I'm going to move it to the top of the chain, and I'm also going to zero it out. Okay, why are we doing this? We're going to go to coordinates 0, 0, 0, right? We have a nice spec here. I'm also going to put it in a null. And what this will allow us to do is move it around, because what we're going to do is we're going to use Signal, which is a Greyscalegorilla plugin, lets you animate stuff really fast, to animate this light going from here over and across. So I'm actually going to set up a linear move, right? No, the lights just kind of move static. If you watch this reference, the lights are just kind of constantly moving. They're not stopping. They're not slowing down. It's a linear move. What are we going to animate? We have to tell Signal what we're trying to animate here. In this case, we're just going to move the light, and it's going to be this X value. And in position, I'm going to say go from 0 and then go to, let's see, let's move it to there. So about half the width of the entire thing. So now, as we play, this light is going to move from center to left, or to the right. And it's all controlled by this curve here, and it's also controlled by this speed here that we're giving it. Okay, so we could change it. This is important because as we have this here, oh, it got moved. As we move this and change this, we can duplicate our null. So now, let's just say that this is our first light. Let's now duplicate this. Let's go back to the starting frame. Let's duplicate this. Sorry, let's duplicate the null and the light, and then move both of them up, and now you're going to see both of them are going to move together. Now here's what's important. The reason we added this null is so that we could do things like rotate it around, and now it's moving in the opposite direction. Okay, so that's easy. Let's do that again. In this case, let's animate it so it's going down, and let's move it to the side of our logo. Okay, so now this one's going to sweep down the edge, just like this. And all those little gleams, they're going to add up. In fact, I think I want to brighten these up a little bit. I'm going to select them all, turn them all up, and this will kind of bling out those edges even more. Okay, so let's do another one. I want this one to be over here, but I want it to start higher. Okay, and I want it to go faster. So in this case, we could change our signal to go faster. By the end of it, it's going to be way down here. So now we're just checking all this stuff. Maybe we need another one again at the bottom. So let's grab that bottom one. Okay, I'm just going to order these. You could decide to name these if you're going to change them a lot. In this case, I'm going to bring this one over and down, and I might actually cheat this one toward the front a little bit. And this will just allow us to get some different edges blinged out. Good, that's a good one. And then let's take another look at our specular. I'm afraid it might be a little too sharp. So let's go into our reflections, open that up. I like that. Maybe it's just the fall off. Okay, let's widen that a little bit. Way too bright. All right. You know, we're getting there. We're getting there. It's a subtle thing. When you're talking about black and white, it's all about contrast, right? So now we have this one over here that's like way too bright. It's just got, it's almost like full up on brightness. I'm just going to change it. Okay, that feels better to me. These L's are not getting any love. In fact, let's grab another spec light and just put it in the back to try to catch some of these edges. Everything behind this text is real 3D, but it's all not showing because there's no light or anything to reflect behind it. So again, I'm going to take this light, I'm going to turn off diffuse, I'm going to move it up, I'm going to go into our top view and move it back. And here's what's cool. We can kind of eyeball it in the viewport. See the where we could see the light showing up right there. I want you to look at that G and right here. I want you to look right here when I'm moving this. Watch. Boop, right there is going to show some of those letters, right? It's going to make it more readable. Okay? Maybe not so bright, but look at all these little blings, all these little hits are helping. Okay? Let's do a test render. I think we're ready because everything we've done up till now has been low res, and we're really not going to see if it's readable or anything like that until we throw it into a moving sequence. So in this case, let's go to our render settings. Let's go to all frames, and we could just keep it kind of small. This is 1,000. We could even go smaller, like 800, but we do want to make sure it's our right frame size. So let's lock that ratio. We're going to kick out all the frames. And in this case, we are going to use the standard render, which a lot of times I reach for physical. I think for most things you want to reach for physical. If you're only using specular, however, I want you to think about using standard first. So let's go ahead and do a render here. Boom, boom, boom. It's a little unreadable. I like the overall style of it, the feel of it, but we're already going to know that it's not very readable. So let's zoom in on this. We're also getting a lot of anti-aliasing, which is a thing that happens with the standard render. So we are going to have to turn up our anti-aliasing. We're also getting some weird little blings and things turning on and off. Things might be intersecting, might be intersecting with our logo. For example, this one over here might be too far back. So let's go ahead and move some of these forward. Anything that's behind the logo, I want to move forward. I don't want anything to intersect because I think that's where we're getting some weird bevel issues. Okay, now we're getting more love, but I think our specular's still a little bit too wide. I just want the little baby blings. There we go. It's really subtle. We're talking small percentages here. And we could also maybe even tone a few of them down where not all of them have to be at 300% here. It might be kind of overwhelming our brightness. I'm also going to check our diffuse light, this middle one, and try to get a little bit more readability in the center. Okay, so that might help. Maybe even the incorporated's not showing very well, but that feels a little bit more readable. Also, our camera angle. So never ever forget about your camera angle. That actually just came together with those a couple little changes. Sometimes those last little changes you want to make are going to help make this readable. It's going to make it a lot more beautiful going forward. So I'm actually going to brighten this light a little bit. That's pretty good. Make it a little bit more readable there. And let's talk about our camera. So again, never ever use just the standard camera. You need to grab a camera. You need to decide what lens you're going to choose. So in this case, the default's always this 36mm lens, which is good. It's a good middle lens. But in this case, I want less of this 3D effect. See this parallax like between the front and the back? You can see this huge gap there. I like that, but not too much of it. So I'm going to pick a more zoomed in lens. And this also means we need to change our rear light. So the angle of our rear light changed. So let's position this again. Might need to be further back. Oh, it is. It's even further back. So let's go way back. There you go. And I'm going to turn it up. turn it back up a little bit. I want to catch that G. There it is. So I'm just looking at that G over there, and it's catching it just enough. Okay. So we have a little bit of detail. We have some rear light. We have our logo going. Not bad. This L is a little bit dark. It's not bad. Maybe even sheet this light over a little bit and a little bit brighter. Okay, so that's nice. So now let's do another render at the kind of current. I don't want to save this yet, so I'm just going to turn that off so it stops bugging me. Again, we have anti-aliasing issues. We'll fix those. We'll look into all this, but let's look again at the pattern of our light. Do we like the way it's moving? In this case, this is really cool. We're getting these nice light blings. There it goes. It's already rendered. That is cool. So we got some good light blings. We got some good edges moving around. You could add more lights to this if you want more detail. Overall, I think we could brighten it a little bit, but I think we'll rely on After Effects to do that. I like the main feel of this is good. So let's move forward. Let's turn on our anti-aliasing to something higher than geometry. In this case, we're going to go to best. And even best is not quite enough to get rid of this anti-aliasing. In fact, we should look at some of these settings. The min level should be at least 2, and the max level should be at least 8. Okay, and this is for really, really detailed specular stuff. And you'll see the render hit on it is pretty significant. So make sure you like your look, make sure everything else is looking good, and then kick this out. Now in this case, I'm going to turn up the resolution as well. So in this case, I'm going to go 1280 by 720 should be fine for this demo. The all frames is on. We're going to kick on anti-aliasing. We're also going to save it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and save, and let's pick a place to save here. It's gonna fire up all the hard drives. Let me take a little sip of water. You got this. Save dialog. All right, I'm gonna call this Gorilla Films Tutorial. Tut. All right, I'm gonna copy that. I'm also gonna name it that. Boom. They're going to be TIFFs. They're going to be 16-bit TIFFs because I want all the data I can get that's reasonable. I don't think I need 32 for this. But we're going to save all these out. We're going to output all 72 frames. And it's going to be at that higher resolution. And it says it's calculating. Do you want to override it? You say, yeah. And there we go. So this is going to kick out. And now let's head on into After Effects and start to pull the sequence in and do the final bit here. So let's head on to After Effects. Let's open up, let's double click to open up our sequence. In this case, we're gonna go to Gorilla Films Tut. Boom. We're gonna open it up and it'll continue to bring in this sequence. Now, in this case, I'm just gonna drag it in. Actually, first, before we drag it in, I wanna interpret this footage at 24 frames a second. I'm going to open up a new comp, just drag it into a new comp. In this case, don't need that. We'll just shrink it down a little. And the first thing we need to do is put a levels on this and just kind of brighten everything up. It's all a little dark. I want my highlights to be brighter, and I want my gamma to go down to really bling out those highlights, but keep this gray not so bright. I don't want that. It's all about balance. It's all about balance. Where's your mids? Where's your mid grays? Where's your blacks? Where's your whites? Move it around. Don't go crazy, but find the balance to base it on. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now what we can do is add a glow to it. So let's go to new adjustment layer. Let's go to glow. Boom. Turn on the glow, and I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit at first. Glow radius. And I'm going to say glow threshold. I'm going to turn that down, and glow intensity. So I'm just going to crank it at first so we can see what's going on. Now, here's something to keep in mind. Anytime you're working with light, anytime you're working with glows or anything in After Effects, 32-bit. 32-bit is the key. 8-bit? No way. How do you change it? I do it this way. I hold down Alt, and I click it, and it goes to 16-bit. Still not good enough. What do? What do I want? 32-bit. Do it again. Wrong button, Nick. Boom, look at that. Look at the difference, right? Not only is it more, is it brighter, it's actually interacting in a more realistic way. 32-bit compositing. Make sure that is on. Okay, so now it's too bright. Let's kick it back a little bit. Okay, we obviously don't need crazy intensity there. And we don't need that big radius either. And we don't need that much glow. So let's kick our threshold way up. Okay, so now we're just trying to bling it out a little. That intensity is still too hot. The radius can go up. Okay, a little bit of bling. Boom, tone it down. All right, that's looking a little sexier, right? Looking a little nicer. Maybe a little too hot for this, but A/B it, right? A/B it. Let's go to intensity, go 0.5, even more subtle. Even that little bit of glow is going to help, okay? That is nice. I like that. Okay, so our glow's good. Now what? All right, let's take a look at it. I'm just going to do a preview. And again, this should be longer. We only brought in the 5 or so frames that were rendered. So how do we get more frames in there? Cinema's back here and it's finished. It's already done. How do we get all these frames in? Well, what we need to do is first go to our composition, go to composition settings, and take our settings from 12 frames and turn it to, let's go 5 seconds. Okay, so now we have 5 seconds. And let's go to our project and go to our frames that we pulled in and right click and say reload footage. And look what happened. All this new data showed up. Boink. And what was cool is we did that while it was rendering, right? Your computer's got plenty of chips on it. We could keep it rendering in the back and then keep all this going here. So now let's look around. That's a little too hefty for me. Let's tone that back. In fact, I think what it is the overall levels could just get kicked back a little bit. Give it some space, Campbell. All right. That's all right. It's not bad. It's not bad. Maybe we might need one more light at the top. So maybe at the very end, we'll add one more specular at the top that's a little bit brighter. But I think overall, I'm digging the feel of this. So how do we add the ramp in and out? Well, the ramp in and out is not just a simple fade. A simple fade will not look the way that this looks. So if we go back here, and we watch that fade up again, this is an optical, it's much more optical. You can see the brights. The brights are there from the beginning. It's bright from full start. So you don't want it to fade to black or anything, but you do want this ramp. So how do we do that? Well, let's add a new adjustment layer. There it is. Good job, Nick. Let's add a levels. Okay, and talk about cramming the brightness down, but not giving up the highlights. Okay, so and we could do this. We can actually emulate this. Look at it's right there. See those highlights peeking through? We could push the highlights up, but also still keep that brightness. Does that make sense? So how do we set this up? Well, let's undo here. Let's get back to the start and try to get kind of an optical fade going on. I want to turn on our keyframe for a histogram. I'm going to hit U to get our keyframe open. I'm going to say over the course of a second, I want you to fade in. Now, where does it start? Well, from here, it's going to cram a little bit brighter. So look at all that brightness going on. Okay, we could also brighten this up. But we also want the overall feel to be dark. Okay, so this is our ramp now. This should look a lot more optical, a lot more realistic. There it is. Right? So that's that. And then we just reverse it to go out. And if you do want it to go from 0, you can just cram this down, right? Now let's look at that. That's a full fade up. But the important part, the reason we did this, and it's not just a piece of black like layer that is raising it over time, is that our gamma and everything changes. And that's how optically things move. It's not a linear move. And this to me looks much more realistic. I'm going to add a easy ease on this keyframe. That's just going to round off that piece there. In fact, let's wait until we do the end of this. So let's just do the end part. So 3 frames is the end. So let's set our end boundary by hitting N on our keyboard. B boundary goes to the beginning like that. We'll crop it. But let's go to our end. Let's copy our other keyframe, which is our dark keyframe, paste it over there, and then let's do the same thing with our middle keyframe. So now it's going to ramp up, stay from here to here, and then ramp down. Now what I'm going to do is grab these, and I'm going to say easy ease on the middle, so that now we have a nice easy ramp up. There's our logo, and then our ramp down. Now, if you're noticing that this isn't center, I apologize. That probably drove some of you absolutely crazy. Sometimes that stuff drives me crazy, so sorry about that. So, okay, we got a little more centered. Now, you know, we could go on to tweak this forever, right? And we can. Like, what's really cool, and I want you to think of it this way, especially with 32-bit compositing. If you like the overall feel of the ramp, but now you feel it's a little bit too bright the way that I do. I think that's too bright over here. Don't change these keyframes. Put another layer on top. This is the important part of linear workflow and 32-bit compositing is there's floating point data. All the brightness, all the darkness gets saved in After Effects. So you can just keep changing stuff. So I'm going to add a new adjustment layer. I'm going to add curves now, my favorite. Curve it up. So now I want to keep the brights up, but I want to darken this bit. It was a little too gray for me, too middle gray. I want it to be a little bit more dark. So there we go. That feels better. It's not super readable, but you know, I think we're getting close. We could change this over time as well, but that is looking good. We got a little bevel going on here. This could be a little bit brighter, but I think we're at a pretty good point here for the tutorial. And if I were to add one more thing specifically to this design, because I always want it to look good, it's these tutorials are sometimes about the technique, and obviously we have some techniques here we used, but the hard part to me is always the design, right? It's always teaching, like, why doesn't this look as good as it should, right? And that's a very hard thing to teach. So I'm going to come back to this render. I'm going to grab this spec light here. I'm going to move it. And I think we need more lights up in this area, up in this upper middle area here. And I think they need to be maybe further out or maybe not further out. I want more bling up top. This is getting lost in my render. So maybe it's just that, right? So we have all these lights moving, and we also can, you know, do things like maybe slow this one down a little bit and make it not so linear. But to me, that feels pretty good. So what I would do at this point is maybe either replace this or just do another render and then import it into here to get that final look. So I want you to experiment with it. To me, let's just do a quick render here and see what this looks like. And that already brightened that up. Now remember, this is much darker than this. And now that I look at it again, I want it back brighter a little. Okay. Now we can also, you know, put a little glow behind this to make it more readable. There's a lot of little tweaks we could do, but I think overall it turned out pretty good. Nice little title sequence here, and I think that'll be it.